Hello, I'm Dan. I'm the Lettings Director at the Property Centre in Taunton. Over the last 7 years, I've been working with investors and landlords. Here are the 5 things that I see landlords who self-manage get wrong the most. So if you're a DIY landlord, if you're managing yourself at the moment, or if you have a property and you don't like the idea of getting an agent involved, you want to take care of it yourself, here are the 5 things to be aware of. Number one is letting to friends or family, or getting too friendly with the tenants that you have in situ. You're much more likely to get a tenant expecting leeway if they're a friend or a family, or if you have a good relationship with them. One of the advantages you have with going with an agent is they're almost a little bit intimidated by us. When we, a professional body, go and ask for rent if it's not paid on time, or we ask to go and do a property visit, they tend to take things a tad more seriously. If you let to a family member or a friend, they expect a little bit more leeway when it comes to being late on the rent. And it's also a very difficult and awkward conversation to have. I'd find it a bit awkward not giving a friend's deposit back, or stinging a friend with a late payment fee or something like that. Whereas if there's a bit of a degree of separation, they see you as the landlord and they're the tenant, or you have a managing agent involved and they're the tenant in relation to them, you're less likely to fall into troubles. So I don't advise letting to friends and family. This is the number one thing that I get people calling me back up 12 months later for, when they decide not to use me to let to a friend or family. Things have gone wrong, it's caused a headache, and they then want to use a letting agent. Number two is getting the setup wrong. If you get something wrong initially, it can have big implications later on down the line. Something as simple as forgetting to give the tenants the government's how to rent guide can mean that serving a Section 21 could be invalid. So make sure, if you're going to do it yourself, that you go onto the government's website, you are giving the tenants absolutely everything that you should be, and you've got the setup completely correct. This is all the certifications: EPC, EICR, gas safety, government's house to rent guide, prescribed information relating to where the deposit is registered, the tenancy agreement, among some other things as well. So make sure you're nailing this so you don't have problems later on down the line. Third thing is rent collection and arrears chasing. I see a lot of landlords who are very, very casual about how they collect the rent and their arrears chasing. With rent collection, have a rent schedule as part of the tenancy agreement, so it's clearly set out when the rent is expected. So it's a lot easier to prove when it's late or not paid at all. And with arrears chasing, it's much better to do it in an evidence-rich way. Phoning a tenant is fantastic. It's more contextual. You get an idea of why the rent hasn't been paid, and that's typically the first thing that we will do. But if the rent arrears persist, it's much better to do things in an evidence-rich way, i.e. emails, letters, WhatsApps and text messages are fine as well. Just make sure you're doing this in a very clear and professional way, so that if the arrears do continue and you end up in a court situation where you're fighting to get arrears repaid to yourself, you have evidence to prove that you have chased for the rent and it was clearly not paid. Number 4 is letting without an inventory. Likelihood is you're going to be taking a security deposit for the property. The way that that deposit is seen is it's the tenant's money that you as a landlord need to make a claim to if anything goes wrong. How can you prove the tenant's done something wrong if you don't have a fantastic inventory of the state of the condition of the property when they moved in? So don't try and do it yourself. We use Southwest Inventories, who are a third-party inventory clerk. They provide a massive inventory with photographs, date and timestamp of absolutely everything. If you're going to let yourself, I recommend employing a similar company to do an inventory for you. Number 5 is failing to keep on top of the rent. Rent prices have absolutely soared over the last couple of years, so you can be forgiven for this to an extent. But I do recommend doing regular rent reviews. It can feel a bit harsh sometimes, but it's much better to do smaller increases more regularly, as opposed to leaving it for 3 or 4 years and realizing that you're leaving £500 on the table. It can have some really irritating implications. One, you're leaving money on the table. A lot of landlords that I speak to, I do a desktop valuation and say that you could be getting £1,000. They're currently getting 600. That extra £400 a month could be very, very useful. And if you want to sell the property with a tenant in situ, having a below market value rent isn't going to help you. So if you are thinking of letting your property and want to do it yourself, or if you've always been a DIY landlord, here are 5 things to make sure that you're getting right every time. Or if you don't want to worry about any of these 5 things or any of the other things involved with lettings, I'd absolutely love to talk to you about our packages, what we do to look after the tenancy and take the stress of all this stuff off your mind.